right? I actually had 3 awkward conversations last year. 2 of them went well and have strengthened the friendships. 1 has ended in the friendship fading, and that's fine.
So were there 3 besides the one you and I had?
Yeah, there was. Yeah,
so I had a lot of awkward conversations last year.
Yeah, because I'm an advocate for it, right? I'm like,
you don't
feeling
practice what you preach over there. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And the third one is my favorite. We've talked about this a bit, which is leaning into your vulnerability. And I think this would be a big hurdle for a lot of us. But this is how you build trust. So that first thing that we all talked about as being the biggest hurdle. And it may sound a little scary, but at the end of the day, you don't have to rush into sharing your deepest, darkest secrets. Some of us might feel comfortable once someone's done that with us, but you can just start slow. But keep in mind, until someone really gets to know the real you, they're just going to be scratching the surface of that persona you put on. So they're not going to be able to form that quality relationship. So take the time to be vulnerable. And I might just chuck 2 anecdotes there before I throw to Amanda. So I said at the start of the show, I had, 2 awkward conversations with people, right? I actually had 3 awkward conversations last year. 2 of them went well and have strengthened the friendships. 1 has ended in the friendship fading, and that's fine.
So were there 3 besides the one you and I had?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, so
I had a lot of awkward conversations last year.
Yeah, because I'm an advocate for it, right? I'm like,
you don't
feeling
practice what you preach over there. That's
right. Exactly. It's important. But with one of the friendships, I didn't like an interaction that I had. It was uncomfortable for me. I didn't understand it, and I sat there resenting that person for a while, and I was angry, and it was chewing me up. And I was like, "What am I doing? I'm a grown up. I'm gonna invite this person to the pub, and I'm gonna have a chat." And we had a chat, and it was uncomfortable as hell. And after that initial conversation, we didn't talk for a little while, and I worried that the friendship had gone. I was like, "Oh, really? Oh, that sucks." But anyways, we're fine. We get along really well, and we know our boundaries. We came to realize that we were spending way too much time together. Like we hit it off so well that we were hanging out like 3-4 times a week. That's too much.
Yeah.
And we started to run out of things to talk about. And I think we started to get on each other's nerves a bit, which resulted in this awkwardness. But anyways, it was good. I sat down and I was like, here's how I feel. Tell me your thoughts. We hashed it out and we were good. Same happened with another one of my friends. There was something that she did which made me feel like my trust had been broken. We discussed it. I could put it in context, and we came out the other side, and it was fine. Now, that was a case, right, where I felt initially that my trust had been broken.
Right.
But I could look at the situation and the person, and I was like, no, I'm willing to let that one go. I don't think it was like a clear, hey, I'm trying to break your trust like others have. And so the friendship moved forward. And another one was one where I had a really... People will be like, geez, Adam, like, what is going on with your life?
Like, what's up with this guy?
But I had another friend that we had a clash at the pub. It's always at the pub. It's an Australian thing. Maybe alcohol is the issue here.
That could be part of it, but a little truth serum or whatever.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But, we had a clash, a difference of opinion. Now, I tried to follow suit with the other friendship examples I've just mentioned, and said, let's sit down and talk about this. And it didn't work. If anything, it just fueled the fire and caused more conflict. And since then, we haven't really spoken. Now, I put that thing to bed. I'm happy about it. Again, I just don't think it was a friendship that really needed to be pushed any further. So I was like, let's let it go. That's fine. So anyways, I've rabbited on a lot about my life. I might throw over to Amanda. Otherwise, I might lose a new friend. She might need to talk to me about this. But yeah, what's your thoughts on this? And have you had some similar examples?
Well, first, I think so like the last anecdote that you gave where the talk didn't go well. Well, there's your clue. That's not where I guess that's a good distinction of that's not an example where you want to keep being persistent. Because before you're talking about being persistent, right? Right now, okay, this isn't going well. You don't need to be persistent with that one. So just to be clear that you don't always have to be persistent.
That's a good point.
And so that's how I guess, is and you gave good examples before too of when to be persistent and why it was important to be persistent. But I think that was a great example of when not to be and just to let it go. But I don't know. I probably don't have as many awkward conversations.
Okay, it's just me.
But maybe I should. I don't know. I will say I do tend, you probably wouldn't think this of me, but I do tend to avoid awkward conversations.
Okay.
Well,
I wouldn't think that of you. I think you're quite candid.
I am, but at the same time, I guess I probably do let things go too long sometimes that are bugging me without addressing them soon enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I know if I addressed them soon, if I addressed them, the people that are important to me would be okay and then would stick around. So I don't know why I don't address them, but I guess it's part of that vulnerability obviously comes into play with that.
Mm.
But I try to think if I had, I mean, besides you and I guess, well, here's another thing. I think it's, for me, I find it's easier to have open and honest conversations sometimes with men than with women. Like it was easier to have one with you than with some of my girlfriends, although there's some that I can. But I remember in your show notes, there was something about how women, or in the article, like women had a harder time trusting other women.
Yes, they did. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
No, I just was thinking back on that. And I think there's a lot of truth. And I was thinking back, and I think this comes into play with the vulnerability though. Because when I read that article, because that was outlined in the article and then it was in your show notes, but when I read that women have a hard time trusting other women, I'm like, yeah, we do. Where does that come from? And I really think who knows where I came up with this, but it goes back to the caveman days, I'm sure, or not even that far back, but it wasn't that long ago in history when women depended on men for everything, really. Like we would depend on men to make our houses, to bring us food, to provide everything we needed to survive. And there's only so many men around. So I think that the women were more competitive with each other because we had to have a man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where it stems from. And I think that's just so in our genes, because people think these things just pass, like, oh, we don't live that way anymore. So that shouldn't be the case. But some of this stuff is just built in our genes. And, it doesn't just change that quickly. So as I'm thinking about why I don't have vulnerable conversations sometimes with my girlfriends, maybe that's why. Maybe that's part of the reason is there is that there's that competitiveness.
You're still back in the cave waiting.
I'm not competing with any of them for a man. Trust me. But I don't know. There is something about that, that you have to be better than the other woman. But I think men must have that too.
Yeah, well,
because they have the same where they would want to reproduce. So they have the opposite side of it.
I have to say I found the vulnerable chat with my female friend was a lot easier than the vulnerable chat with my male friend.
Right.
Because I don't know. I found like, it was just more uncomfortable for me, I guess. I don't know what it was. It was, so there could be something there. I think it's because that. I think as guys as well, I think we'd all agree on this, where our egos can get in the way sometimes, and one of the blocks for us as men, I think, which is why, I don't think it's a shock to anyone that, there's a lot of stats out there from Movember and things saying that men struggle to talk to men, is that it's an egoic thing, for me to say, hey, I didn't like that thing, and for me to go, for the other person to say, oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Because your ego's like, no, you should stand up for yourself. And regardless of whether it was you did wrong that other person, you're a man and men are always right. So you need to say, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong in this instance. I am the superior man here. I think that still plays a role. Now, this friend of mine, when I say it was a less easy conversation than the other one, it was still a pretty good conversation. But that's because I think this is an example of a pretty woke man. I think somebody who's, probably more willing to have that conversation.
Sure.
Whereas, we've joked about the blokey blokes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could have a conversation like that with one of these tough blokes who doesn't want to talk about it,
Right.
like who knows? So
yeah,
it's interesting.
well, and I guess that when we were talking about being vulnerable too, so in thinking of a male conversation versus a female conversation, so like I'm super vulnerable with my friends about like personal things about me, and we're super vulnerable with each other about that, which I think men sometimes have a hard time being vulnerable even with those things.
Yeah,
but what I have a hard time being vulnerable with is about things about our relationship. Like our friendship, I don't always have those vulnerable conversations, but anything else, it's on the table. I mean, there's no secrets. So whatever, it's all a fair game.
Yeah.
But that takes time to build, like we talked about the trust thing. I mean, obviously that didn't start out that way. Everything was on the table. But so you, in the beginning though, you alluded to like talking about how to make friends. So I guess you've given a couple of examples of how to make friends, but it is difficult. Like I'm horrible at making friends. I'll just say that. But that's why all my friends are accountants, because they're all people that I worked with. And so that I was forced to spend time with them. And then eventually it turned into more. But besides you, like a really good friend, I haven't really made any in years.
Yeah.
Which sounds really bad, but I mean, I've had superficial friendships, but
they saying in the article 50 hours to make a casual friend, 200 for a close friend. I mean, that's a while, especially if they're all quality hours. But I mean, it is hard. I'd have to say, of course, people would make a lot of friends with work colleagues, but in my experience, when I was at the bank, I had a lot of friends that I worked with. They weren't friends. We didn't really know that much about each other. It was all superficial. Let's go out and get on the booze, and that's about it. Like we didn't really sit down and ever have like chats, and they weren't there for me, and in the end, I wasn't there for them. So that's why I think those working relationships you need to be mindful of. But I just think sometimes as the spiritual part of me says, sometimes people will just drop into your lap. Like,
true.
At the end of the day, when I messaged Amanda on LinkedIn, I would have never thought that we'd be, here over a year later, chatting every week, sometimes for a couple of hours each time, well, pretty consistently 2 hours each time. I didn't think that. I didn't go into that conversation going, I can't wait to make a friend. It was more, I'm interested in the content you produce. Let's have a chat. But at the same time, I think I was ready. I'd open myself up to, to making a friend. And here we are today producing what we do and chatting and stuff. So I think there's a level of where you can spiritually, the universe will send people to you. But then you also need to be proactive. I think be courageous, be vulnerable, like, hey, it's awkward to ask somebody for their phone number or to catch up. Yes, absolutely. But you've just got to say, well, do I want a friend? Do I want to be friends with this person? I've got to put myself out there. And maybe they'll say, no, you weirdo. I make coffees for you. I'm not going to go to the pub with you. Oh, okay. And that'd be hell awkward. And maybe I won't go back to the coffee shop, but I can walk away and say, at least I had the guts to ask him, that's good. But I mean, people are pretty good for the most part. Like if you're getting a good vibe from a conversation with someone, they probably are too. And they're probably going home going, I really wish we could catch up, So you've got to be a bit courageous and use the outlets you've got. And if you don't have outlets, especially with COVID and working from home, again, you might need to be courageous and go, all right, I'm going to go and do some hobby, and in that hobby I might meet somebody and then I can start forming up a friendship. But what I liked about this article the most was the fact that it had 250,000 reads. The conversation, for anyone who doesn't know, it's essentially like a consolidation of all this, all these like academic journal articles, and they put it into like a nice digestible article where they reference all of these papers, and it's really cool. But yeah, for that to be the top one and for it to be picked up by the ABC over here, it's because it's relevant to people. Like there are people everywhere who are adults who are struggling to make friends. So I think that's it. Just understand you feel vulnerable, but clearly so does a whole heap of other folks.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know, just don't feel that you're alone. Just go, okay, I'm vulnerable, but so are they. Let's give it a shot, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.